Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and because everyone else is making a personal statement, I think I have to make a personal statement. Actually, there's several layers to my personal statement. First of all, Joe, I'm guilty. I've been in Donegal for more than a day. I've been hiding and enjoying Donegal, but watching this event via Twitter. So that's my first personal statement. The second one relates to who got asked to be here first. And I think I was. So I think the gender balance was established at that point. So good on you, Joe. And I suppose the third thing is the more serious one about gender and balance and all of that stuff. And I'm not as young as I used to be. And when I was 17, I believed that, of course, women would eventually get there, because why wouldn't we? And I'm more than 57 now, and I've realised that, gosh, I wasn't right when I was 17, that actually you do need to make strong interventions and statements around gender in order for there to be visibility. Because what you see is what you get. And I suppose by way of observation, I worked mainly in the agriculture sector for most of my life, previously as a journalist, and I was very conscious that the photographs coming into me were of a certain perspective. And I would always desire to get a balance in pictures, as I would when I worked on ear to the ground in television. But sadly, women usually don't stand into the picture. So there's a lot of women in this room, and I would urge you, when somebody is taking a photograph, don't say, oh no, I'll hide, because that's what women do. So frankly, I think women too have to step up to the plate. And I think photographers would also acknowledge that it can be difficult to get women to stand into the photographs. So those are the personal statements. The trouble with coming third is that a lot has been said. And I don't want to repeat, because a lot of the points are, you know, there's a commonality of the theme between what I've just heard and really excellent presentations. But I want to try and give it a different twist. So you saw me busily editing there, so I'll try and edit as I go along, just to reflect and maybe build on some of the points. It's important to talk, though, to the theme of this morning's topic. And this is a full house, which is fantastic. Early morning. I know you had a very full house last night as well. So obviously, actually, you, Joe, engineered the publicity about the Glenties to get a full house. Now I realise what you were up to. So that really tells its own story. Don't underestimate negative publicity. It works. On the topic of a stronger, more cohesive Europe in a turbulent world, I think it's also important to remark that there's turbulence within the European Union, that it's not as though we're immune to internal turbulence, but it's certainly matched by external turbulence and division, and a dangerous retreat from the institutions and methods of global governance and diplomacy. There are deep divisions in societies both within and outside the European Union, as exemplified by the rise in political parties with very simple and appealing solutions to very complex problems. Any debate about the future of Europe must address the issue of security and defence, and the premise of my remarks is that Ireland needs to have that conversation and allow for a mature debate which does not descend into accusations of our sons and daughters being conscripted into an EU army and heading to war. Usually during European elections, this is where we end up. Rather, security and defence is about ensuring that we maintain peace and provide protection to citizens. Indeed, the motto of the current Austrian presidency of the European Union is a Europe that protects. And that's a motto that the Juncker Commission from the very outset also spoke about. Indeed, Jean-Claude Juncker, when he was running for a candidate to be president of the Commission, spoke about the need to combat cross-border crime and terrorism. He said this was a common European responsibility, the need to crack down on human trafficking, smuggling and cybercrime, of which we've heard a great deal. We need to tackle corruption, fight terrorism and counter radicalisation. And all of those issues have been to the fore of this Commission's security agenda. The Union's common security and defence policy allows the European Union to take a leading role in peacekeeping operations, conflict prevention and in the strengthening of international security. It's an integral part of the European Union's comprehensive approach to crisis management, and it draws on civilian and military assets. The European Union's common security and defence policy allows the European Union to take a leading role in peacekeeping operations, conflict prevention, and in the strengthening of international security. It's an integral part of the European Union's comprehensive approach to crisis management, and it draws on civilian and military assets. The security agenda is a very broad one, and it's about member states of the Union collaborating collectively without prejudice to the very specific character of security and defence policy of member states. And as I said earlier, I think Ireland needs to be very much part of that debate. And because of this enhanced focus on security and defence, the Fine Gael MEPs, we produced a discussion document on Ireland and the European Union defending our common European home. And I'll speak a little bit more about that. And this was part of a look as four MEPs on topics that deserved wider debate and needed a platform to have those issues raised. And indeed, we'll be doing other policy documents before the European elections. And the idea is to allow space for debate. So I very much appreciate the opportunity this morning to be able to talk about some of those issues. To some extent, it may be too much to expect the common security and defence policy to gain the same traction as the debate on the common agriculture policy. But I think we do need to make a start. And I think informed debates, and I think that's what the panel here is hoping for, will frame the future of Ireland's security and defence strategy. But we do need space for that debate. And I mentioned the agriculture policy because, of course, that is my background and it's the area that I worked a great deal on. And I'm conscious, too, in terms of crisis management, and we have a drought in Ireland and we've dreadful fires, and we sympathise very much with our Greek colleagues this morning, that security is much greater than, I think, people's perception of it. We talk about cybersecurity, but we all talk about armaments, but actually security is also about energy security and food security. And given the unsettling changes around climate and weather patterns and diseases and other things, that security is a very big subject. And in one aspect, it is an umbrella subject for so many other policies, and we need to frame the debate in that context. On the other hand, we do need to have the right balance between our policies, and we need to be prepared to fund all of these policies, and that is going to be one of the challenges. If you take security and defence, it is certainly a big part of the debate, this wider debate on the future of the European Union. It certainly has increased in prominence on the agenda, particularly because of terrorist attacks, and that's been mentioned, and because people are feeling a little bit more insecure, and they therefore rank security as one of the top issues of concern. And if you look to the Eurobarometer of June of 2017, Europeans consider challenges to the internal security of the European Union as important, and particularly terrorism, 95% are concerned, and organised crime and cybercrime at 87%. And Ireland is no different. 96% think that terrorism is an important challenge to the internal security of the European Union, followed by cybercrime at 68%. There is a growing view that the European Union must take ownership and control of its own security and defence needs, not least, and this has been referenced, because those whom we have come to rely on in the past are not as reliable. I think Brexit has also played a part in strengthening the focus on security and defence. The UK is a significant player on this field of security and defence, and as an EU member has been reluctant for the European Union to cooperate significantly in this area, preferring to operate via NATO or on a bilateral or multilateral basis outside of EU structures. With Brexit on the horizon, the European Union has felt more empowered to strengthen its work and policy in this area, no longer dealing with a reluctant United Kingdom. There's always a but, though, because even though that is the context, in fact, Brexit is also a challenge around security and defence cooperation between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And there's been warnings from the UK side that Europe should not gamble with the security of the Union by refusing to yield to Britain's demands for post-Brexit police and counter-terrorism cooperation. On the other side, the European Union is pointing out that the UK is part of our sharing of information and data around security and criminal threats because it's a member state of the European Union, and that will change when it becomes a third country. So security and defence is also one of those very tricky issues that we're going to have to discuss in our future partnership with the United Kingdom post-Brexit. And I know you had a good discussion last night on Brexit-related issues. don't ignore this one when it comes to the future, and perhaps there will be a discussion on it in the question and answer session. The panellists have outlined some of the threats, the changes in geopolitics. We had the recent NATO summit, which was dramatic for many reasons. And there are the threats from Russia. I think it's very important as a European Union, and again, just referencing Brexit, how we very much appreciate the solidarity of our European Union member states when it comes to issues of the border and the Irish question in the withdrawal agreement. But equally, we need to understand the sensitivities around security and defence for some member states in particular. I referenced Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. And when I speak to members of the European Parliament from those regions, they live in fear, and it's a very palpable fear. And I try and say to, when I'm gathering or at meetings here in Ireland, that we need, I think, to understand more the challenges that our fellow European member states face and fear. Because if we don't do that, then I don't think we show that sufficient solidarity with them. And in turn, we do expect solidarity on the issues of concern to us. So I think that is going to be something we're going to have to talk a little bit more about in order that we listen to concerns of others and have our own concerns addressed. I think the future of Europe debate isn't just on strengthening the European Union itself, but it's about how to strengthen this global rules-based order in which we operate, to solve problems, address challenges, and resolve conflicts, and promote European Union values. If you look at trade, and I mentioned NATO and the US President and how he addressed sensitive issues there in a not too sensitive way, equally the President has undermined the WTO and indeed threatened his allies at the WTO. The US are vetoing the appointment of new judges to the WTO's appellate panel. So the dispute settlement mechanism is not functioning, and indeed it's really going to be threatened in September because the next judge is due to retire and the appellate body will no longer be quorate at that stage. So when the UK looks towards the WTO for the future of its trading system, it's not such an easy place either because of the shifts and the different emphasis that the US President has on this. We've seen the imposition of tariffs on steel and on aluminium. And I suppose what's interesting was the response of Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, when he tweeted, because sometimes when you see a tweet, you have to respond with the tweet. And I'll quote his tweet: "With friends like that, who needs enemies? But frankly, the European Union should be grateful. Thanks to him, we got rid of all illusions. We realise that if you need a helping hand, you will find one at the end of your arm." I think that's a very clear statement of how the European Union views itself in today's rather fractured world, and not having that same diplomatic space or even the rules of diplomacy that prevailed in the past. The threat of Russia has been mentioned, so I won't go into great detail on that. And I have mentioned already the concerns of the Baltic states in that regard. And I cannot emphasize enough that when I listen and have coffees with my colleagues from those countries, the palpable sense of fear that they feel. Migration hasn't been mentioned thus far, but I think it is a really important topic which has added to the sense of insecurity for citizens, particularly in member states that have faced the greatest numbers of people coming, whether they are seeking asylum or whether they are economic migrants. And ironically, even though the numbers coming into Europe has declined, the legacy of the last 2 years is still very great. So that sense of insecurity prevails. It is also being used inappropriately. The word influx is always, I think, a rather insensitive one when you're dealing with people who live and have experienced great difficulty. But it is being used by populist parties to fuel further fear. It's also giving rise to very simplistic proposals to solve it. So we protect our external borders and all will be well. And I'm glad that Europe isn't just thinking in that direction, although there is a very strong focus on securing the external borders of the European Union and a proposal to increase significantly the numbers in Frontex who will secure that border. And I think it is logical that the European Union takes that approach because perhaps we were caught off guard in terms of having structures in place and manpower in place to manage migratory flows. But it's not enough to build walls and barriers and hide internally and think all will be well. I often say when I speak at public meetings that it will not be the threat for my day, but for my children and their children, unless we have strong development policies and support for Africa around all specific areas, from agriculture to health to governance to anti-corruption. We are wasting our time, and we will leave behind a really awful legacy for generations to come. Frankly, if I were in those countries and had nothing, but knew that you had something, I'd want to join where you are. And I think that Europeans who think that we will be safe and keep what we have, we hold, without actually saying we hold it because we help others, will be a weaker Europe if we adopt that approach. But it takes huge political leadership in the current climate to talk about those things in a way which brings people with us on this journey. And that's why events like today, like summer schools, allow, if you like, time for debate and distillation of ideas. Also allow time for fears to be raised without being shot down, because maybe in the past, when these fears were raised, instead of allowing us to discuss them in an open and effective way, they were suppressed. But they always rise up somewhere. There's a weakness somewhere, and these issues rise. So I welcome the fact that the European Union has a trust fund for Africa, that we are focusing not just on internal issues, but also on our duties morally, ethically, and politically, and out of self-interest, that we look at assisting our near neighbourhood and help these people do what we all want to do, which is to live in our own place. Or at least if we choose to leave, that we leave it by choice and not because we feel we absolutely have to. There's more detail on that in my speech, which will be available, but I want to just jump to some other points because I'm conscious of time. PESCO has been mentioned, and this, as you know, allows defence cooperation, which I think is really important. Ireland has joined 2 projects that will help our defence forces get the best training, and it's another project to help our island protect our seas. There is a European Defence Fund, and this is to assist in the coordination and helping national investments in defence research to allow member states spend money more efficiently. It has a significant budget, and it is open to all member states. Referring back to the Fine Gael document, which was led by my colleague Brian Hayes, again, the whole purpose of this was to put out a document for discussion and debate. And we're very pleased with the level of engagement on the document. And we've proposed a number of recommendations, which I'll just skip through. But it's very important to say at this juncture that we do not support the creation of a European Union army, and nor indeed do I think that that is something that is envisaged by many, many people in the European Union, though there are those who believe that is something they would like to see. And I'd hope that in that debate, those who have that view, no more than those who have a different view, can at least tease out the issue rather than being condemned for having an opinion in either direction. Some of the recommendations we talk about is, one, for example, the triple lock system, to review that, to see is it fit for purpose. To create a central intelligence unit, developing a national security council, supporting the emerging EU defence union, continuing our very strong commitment to peacekeeping and crisis management operations. They're just some of a whole range of recommendations contained in this report. Our spending on defence is the lowest in the European Union at 0.3% of GDP, and that's according to the World Bank. I concur absolutely with the comments around our defence forces. They need the best equipment, training, and they need better pay and conditions. And I think the Taoiseach acknowledged that himself. And really, I agree with you, Jack, we do need to put this more to the fore in any conversation around pay agreements, because we want a strengthened defence force, but it's not happening because of those issues around pay and conditions. So very briefly then, these 21st century threats of cyber terrorism, cyber attacks, international terrorism, this discussion on mass migration, natural disasters, drug and human trafficking. no one member state can deal with these on their own. And that's the whole purpose of a conversation around security and defence, that we do it collectively in a way which yields better results than if we attempt to do it separately. It's also important to say that this conversation around security and defence at European Union level doesn't involve our sovereign wishes being overridden by others. We're part of the conversation. We're not going to be ignored in the conversation. And sometimes, while I say there's very little discussion around security and defence in Ireland, and this is true, which is why this platform is particularly helpful, you know, despite that low level of debate, if you look at the European Movement's 2018 poll on Ireland in the European Union, we found that 59% of people agreed that Ireland should be part of increased EU defence and security cooperation, with 33% disagreeing and 8% saying they didn't know. So in this respect, the public may be ahead of politicians. We may have a discussion in the Q&A on neutrality, and as I said, possibly the triple lock as well. But can I bring God into the equation just briefly? Not to mention the gender issue around God, but let's move from that. But the serious issue of religion and foreign policy. One of my jobs as Vice President is I'm responsible for dialogue with religious and non-confessional organisations. This is Article 17 of the Lisbon Treaty. So this was new ground for me in the last year and a half. And it's been a very interesting journey. But religion is very much back on the agenda for the European Commission and the EU's External Action Service, both in words and indeed actions on the ground. And I think the attacks of 9/11 demonstrated to the world the need to pay attention to the potency of religion as a force in global affairs. The US found to its cost the error of paying insufficient attention to religion as a force in world affairs. Efforts from the mid-70s to study the phenomenon of the religious schools in Iran were dismissed by the CIA as sociology, with no bearing on global politics. I think the subsequent emergence of a Shia Islamic State at the end of the 1970s caught the US completely off guard. And I'll just reference a book written by US State Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. And the title of the book is The Mighty and the Almighty, Reflections on America, God and World Affairs. And she, and I quote, said, "To lead internationally, American policymakers must learn as much as possible about religion and then incorporate that knowledge into their strategies." Over the past decade, references to religious issues have multiplied in the President's annual national security strategy. By comparison, the European Union did not seriously consider religion and its implications for foreign and security policy until relatively recently. Religion remains a very potent force. Repeated surveys have demonstrated that religious sentiment is a growing phenomenon, and over 2/3 of the world's population believes themselves to be religious. And I haven't written this, but ironically, 79%, if I recall correctly, of the world's population do not have freedom of religion or belief as a basic right, which is something that is quite extraordinary and something to ponder on. For many of these people who are religious, religion is a strong source of their identity, frequently one which surpasses national or ethnic identity. Such a powerful identifier can be used to rally people around precise causes or actions with effects that are potentially both positive and negative. And I think it's no harm just to bring that into the conversation, because studies show that religion and religious identity are on the rise globally, and we do need to engage with religious actors. So very finally, I mentioned resources, and I think we are going to be challenged to come up with a budget for the European Union post-2020 that's fit for purpose. With the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, there will be a gap. We don't know how great that will be, but certainly resources will be stretched. We have many member states prepared to pay more into the budget to fund new policy areas, including security and defence, but funding new challenges and giving more to research and innovation. We want to be cautious about divisions that will be created if the scenario is proposed that we fund new challenges by taking from existing policies like cohesion or indeed agriculture. It's not a good basis for a conversation around a strong policy framework, including around security and defence. So we do need to work with those member states that are reluctant to fund or to give more to the budget, to persuade them of the value of a strongly funded European Union budget. I hope that that will be resolved by the European elections in May of next year. I think it will be very good to go into those elections with a strong budget framework and be able to tell people where our priorities are and how they will be funded. I'm not sure if that will be the case, although I hope it will be. I also hope, as a personal statement, that the next elections in Ireland will be the local and European elections of 2019. But one never knows. Thank you very much.